My name is Elizabeth Harrington Lambert. I am the Associate Director of Fellowships and Scholarships in the Career Center, and I am your main point of contact on the Vanderbilt campus for the Keegan Fellowship. And I'm going to let our Keegan alumni, soon to travel 2020 and 2021 fellows, introduce themselves and share something about their experience, and then we'll do Q&A. Thank you so much for joining us. Judd, do you want to take it away?
Sure. My name is Judd Pankey. I was the fellow in 1982. My thesis was a overview of the problems, both economic and political, of finding oil and gas reserves outside the Middle East. At that time, I had the privilege to work with both the World Affairs Council, World Trade Council, the Ford Foundation, and Exxon. And I took the fellowship, and with some creative financing and English teaching along the way, I stretched the fellowship into 2 years. So, but that was a long time ago. Appreciate everybody's interest and look forward to your questions.
Hi, all. This is Danielle Kitchen. I was a fellow in 2018 and 2019. Don't have as good of stories as Judd does, but I did my fellowship on relationships between civilians and the military in different countries, sort of sparked from this really interesting time period when I was at Vanderbilt of a new administration and sort of former military and current active duty military moving into administrative spots, and just really got me thinking about sort of like what is the role of the uniformed services, specifically within the government, and sort of how does what the public thinks about them affect where they deploy and what they do. So sparked that, and actually didn't intend to do anything after related to the military, or at least hadn't committed to it yet, but ended up actually commissioning once I got back. So that's sort of how it changed the course of my life. And same as Judd, excited you guys are here and can talk about Keegan all day. So looking forward to any questions.
Hey, yo, my name is Matt Zang. I graduated virtually as the part of the class of 2020. Originally, we were, Francis and I, that is, as the 2020-2021 fellows, we were supposed to set out immediately after graduating in 2020, but that departure date has since been postponed, right now set for July of this year. Fingers crossed, everything goes well. And my specific topic has to do with marriage and the process of forming long-term human connection across different cultural, sociological, political, linguistic barriers. I'm very interested in what exactly bonds two individuals over the course of a lifetime. I think something really special about Keegan, when I attended my own information session back in the fall of my senior year, was that you could really explore any topic that you were interested in, as long as it tied into your future development. But that development could be either professional or personal. And so I really took advantage of the opportunity to look into something more personal.
Hi, everyone. My name is Frances Burton, and as Matt said, I am one of the fellows who was supposed to travel after we graduated for the 2020-2021 fellowship. So have not actually traveled yet. So while Matt, Burton, and I don't have the stories that Danielle and Judd do, we can hopefully answer some questions about application processes, and also thinking about traveling in the time of COVID, because I know the three of us have been thinking a lot about that as we prepare for hopefully July departure. And in terms of my topic, I will be studying national park systems around the world to study kind of different styles of conservation, how conservation and protected areas impact local communities, and how kind of the US idea of a national park proliferated and changed all around the world.
My name is Burton Christmas, just like the holiday. I graduated in 2021. I see a lot of familiar Zoom tags on this call, so it's wonderful to see a lot of exciting people who are applying for this thing. I grew up as a balloon artist and got to speak about that at my first year at Vanderbilt, at TEDx Vanderbilt. And another of the speakers happens to be on this call, and I saw that Danielle had this fancy ass slideshow, and I was like, oh, I want a fancy slideshow. How do I get pictures from 17 different countries in my slideshow? And she explained to me how I could do that. And so my project will be on artists around the world. I am very curious to see how artists, not just balloon artists, but artists of all varieties, are telling the story of COVID or not telling the story of COVID. I think we don't have a lot of, Spanish flu themed art, but maybe if we did, then we would be more prepared when this came around. And so I want to see if that's something that we're going to be focused on this time around. So, yeah.
So I think, Judd, maybe if you'd like to start, if you want to talk some about your travels and your experiences as a Keegan Fellow, and since you also have had the experience of serving as a reviewer and an interviewer, tell us a little bit about how the fellowship has evolved over the last several decades.
Wow. I had my personal program, and what my study was really an offshoot of summer jobs that I had where I was making money to go to school. And so my interest in oil and gas came from that. And then I took up with a gentleman who used to work for Bloomberg Business Week. He had written on a subject and written on oil and gas resources outside the Middle East. So really, I just had the idea to take that. I was not going to be able to do a semester abroad just due to other commitments at school. So this was really my only opportunity. So what my programming was, and to really Barton and Matt's point, you have to have a passion for what, and the committee can really see that passion, whether it's personal or professional. But you have to have a passion for a subject matter. You don't have to be an expert in it, but you have to have a curiosity, and that curiosity has to come through with the selection committee and being prepared. You can't, it's impossible to have a day-to-day itinerary worked out, but having the passion, having the expectations of how you would execute on your program, and then being able to call out the locations and why those locations are specific. Over the years, people had tried to go to, say, 2 locations, and but really what this fellowship is about is as much as a development of the individual as it is of the subject matter that you want to tackle or become proficient at. So over the years, we've seen, and honestly, my subject matter is so mundane compared to some of the programs that some of the more recent fellows have come up with. The students at Vanderbilt now are incredibly sophisticated, incredibly well read, incredibly well instructed and taught. And since I've been doing this now for almost 20 years, selecting people, the passion comes through because you all are exposed to so much more than what we were. And what we were fortunate to do is we had folks and various deans there at the school. And now you've got people like Elizabeth who you can leverage, who have an experience of all these other fellowships that are out there, and she can compare and contrast. Literally, when I was going through school, there was the Eisenhower Fellowship, the Watson Fellowship, the Rotary, the Fulbright, and that was really about it. Now the opportunities are endless, but I would tell you the Keegan is really the only thing close that provides a broad brush self-designed program where you can go to multiple locations to study. And that's really quite rare because all those schools that used to have the Keegan that no longer, they all lament. But Vanderbilt, both the school and the alumni have kept this going. So that's a long-winded answer. Sorry, but you have to have that. It's that passion, and then developing. And we can always tell on the selection committee when someone has done it the week before. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So it doesn't have to be a thesis, but having an idea of where you want to go, how you want to execute, and the passion, that's what comes through.
So Danielle, anything you want to add as the most recent Keegan to have the opportunity to travel? Do you want to tell us a bit more about your experience or how you decided on your topic?
Sure, I'll try not to. I agree with everything Judd said, but I'll try not to be totally redundant. So, and I saw your chat, but if anyone has questions, I'll just sort of reiterate to feel free to put questions in there. But on the last thing Judd said, just sort of thinking through, I know a lot of you are probably in the phase of like, what do I do? Do I want to do this? You have probably multiple options. I know when I was actually applying for Keegan, I'd deferred a consulting offer. So just if you do have questions about that, I'm sure Elizabeth can answer them. That is an option. Most companies are willing to defer an offer for a year. It's fairly easy to do. You just rewrite the offer letter for a year later. So if this is something you're sort of dialing into and not sure how you would navigate another job or another commitment, I would just at least say like it's at least worth the conversation. Because Keegan is such a unique fellowship, and I don't think I quite realized it at the time. There's so many now, and so many great ones that all I think are focused on development. But I think Keegan is unique just because of the amount of sort of personal development that you can actually get from it. And a lot of that just has to do with the autonomy that you're given. And it's this balance of autonomy and support. The whole fellowship board will support you and encourage you, and anything you need. I think that cohort of former fellows is such a good group of people to call on for advice, not just like, hey, where do I go in this place? You guys have connections, but also a group of people that you can say like, hey, I'm lonely. I've been abroad for 4 months. I'm eating strange food. I'm staying with this family that doesn't speak much English. I miss my bed. I miss my family. Just a good group of people to be able to have very real conversations like that with. And I also think that's a really important experience to have that's totally different from college where, to graduate, you need to take this set of courses and meet these criteria. And that's how you graduate. Keegan is like the total opposite of that. It's like, why are you interested in this? Sort of exactly what you've heard everyone say. It has to be something that you're really fascinated by, that you can actually study and talk about for a year and you're not going to get bored. And I think that's a lot of just sort of what keeps you going. And I think that's also just what makes Keegan so interesting. Pick anything. There's no topic that you really can't write on. I guess a few things I would point out bringing that up. When you think about a topic, you can get creative. And like Judd said, it doesn't have to be, I know exactly how I'm going to do this. In fact, you almost certainly will not know exactly how you're going to do it. And a lot of that will just be going to the first country and the second country and talking with fellows and talking with your advisor and readjusting course from there. But having an idea of like, here's what I'm passionate about. I've actually thought through how I'm going to look at this problem and making sure that it's something that's feasible. There's no topic that's off the table, but sort of like Judd said, it's easy to see when someone wrote the week before. It's also easier, I think, to see when someone sort of hasn't thought through like there's been a few really great proposals on fascinating topics, but when you think about like looking at those in foreign countries, just thinking through like, can I actually do this? Is it feasible? How is it feasible? Are questions I think you should at least just sanity check. And maybe that's even like asking a friend to review it and say like, does this make sense? Would this be ridiculous to propose, even if I had to sort of readjust and attack the problem in a different way? So I'll pause just to not continue rambling, but happy to answer any questions too.
I have a question. I guess kind of like on a similar note, thinking practically, what did you find, I guess you and Judd, what do you guys find the most effective way to kind of learn more about your topic? Like, was it formal questions with specific people or specific organizations you had in mind, or was it like sharing a meal with someone and more casual conversation?
Um, I had there were several professors at Vanderbilt who were not necessarily conversant in oil and gas, but they were conversant in developing economics or developing economies within the third world. And we had a very active graduate school program. So I went to him and spoke to him about developing economies, what the energy sector looked like. And then I just did some basic research, um, through this is this is pre-internet, but this is through periodicals, calling some editors, calling some publishers who were sending people to some of the places. So that's how I developed my itinerary. But it's also how I developed a list of people. The Vanderbilt community is just an amazing group of people who are incredibly open to giving and giving advice. So not only within the school, but I would, you should reach out to alumni, and you would certainly reach out to any of the other fellows, and we would all have a little different take on it. But yeah, I crafted my proposal through just research, honestly.
I just want to make sure I'm scoping this answer. Is your question about the leaving for the fellowship, like getting background info, or are you talking about once you're on the fellowship, just like interviewing people?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking more like when you're actually in a foreign country, like how do you go about answering kind of the questions, interests you have, but obviously planning as well, like is helpful to know. Any advice about that is also helpful. So thank you, Jen.
Judd, do you want to jump in again here? I think you have good
Well,
advice here.
yeah, only that once you're on, and everybody mentions this, but once you're on your fellowship, you have to be able to pivot, and you have to pivot to those opportunities that are presented to you. I literally had a week by week schedule laid out that was just ridiculous. And nobody told me it was ridiculous until the first 3 weeks in London. And I'm sitting there speaking with an OPEC minister who said, "Hey, why don't you come to Geneva?" I said, "Well, no, I'm supposed to be in France." And he goes, "What? I thought you were on a self-designed program." And so I pivoted to go to Geneva, and it just opened up all these other doors. So how we did it is we can't emphasize, or I can't emphasize enough, doing your due diligence with these individuals and making sure that they're ready to accept you. What I learned the hard way was when I was in gatherings in Geneva at that OPEC conference and everybody met there, we were on neutral territory. When I got to their home country, it was a very different reception and a very different, all of a sudden, all that transparency and all the questions I had became, they couldn't really answer. And there was a great deal of hesitancy. So you have to kind of choose, you have to be mindful of, what folks can really, and again, some of it's just naive, but you're and now with the internet and being able to text people and email people and really allow folks to prepare for, your visit, it's much easier. But we all have stories of we literally show up at the airport and we don't know where, you don't know where you're going to go. Your first things is that you had to find a place to sleep and you had to find a place to eat, and you essentially had to get stable and find a place that could be your office before you launch off onto your academic or onto your study. So you just network. It's just that simple. Or that's what it was for me. And never be shy to ask folks for help. Sorry, Danielle.
It's okay. No, mine follows like those exact themes. It's really topic dependent. I think, is it Victoria that asked that? That a lot of, I think you'll see, and if you read through, Matt put a link to the website in, but if you read through some of the proposals, I think you'll see just some proposals lend themselves to different ways of gathering information. Judd and I both had a theme of like some places it was really hard to get at the things that we wanted to ask about. And so I think just had to be like very intentional and actually finding people to interview. Whereas I think you'll see we got smarter because Barton and Francis and Matt have really interesting topics that I think will be easier to get access to and ask people about. And some topics can always be more sensitive than others. But some don't necessarily require face-to-face interviews, or at least not solely face-to-face interviews. And to just give like a tangible example of that, the other fellow, my year 2018 was Jerome, and what he was looking at was public transportation and the infrastructure of cities. So whereas my fellowship was really focused on conversations with people, his was really focused on just like, can I get on a subway or a bike, or can I walk and just see a city? Which is really fascinating and a totally different way to look at it. But I think should just sort of keep your eyes open when you think about these fellowships. It doesn't necessarily have to just be, you have to sit down with someone and have a conversation. We're very lucky that a lot of people speak English, but you don't necessarily have to do something where you're always thinking about language barriers. You could do something where you're walking around and just so your observations are part of the fellowship. That should probably be it no matter what. I mean, that's part of like your development, but there's some topics that I think you'll just find like there are different ways to look at it. And you can hone that too, like when you're writing the research proposal, when you're talking to the fellows in an interview, but just thinking through like if there are creative ways to look at this topic and it's not always just a person-to-person conversation, because that's obviously going to be the hardest in terms of like tracking people down. It's going to self-select for like the people that Westerners have connections to, which you should just like always keep in mind of like the people that are most connected are likely you're selecting for a certain demographic of society when you go to these places. So just thinking through if there's another way to do it. I don't know if you want more specific, but that's just some sort of broad guidance I would give.
I have a question, if that's all right. Awesome. So this is kind of touching on Danielle, something you and Judd both mentioned. It's going back to if you are sitting down in those one-on-one conversations. I know probably a lot of projects deal with kind of vulnerable and marginalized populations. And so how are you building trust with those communities and those people, either to go in and observe or actually sit down and have those conversations? Kind of what's your advice either for Barton, Matt, and Francis, like building those connections before you go, but also kind of on the ground in those moments, trying to go with the flow while also being cognizant of privilege and your perspective as a Westerner and a foreigner, and still learning something meaningful without kind of imprinting or leaving a mark that kind of furthers supremacy in a lot of different ways. Very long-winded question. Essentially just would love advice.
I actually, Matt, if you're on, can you answer that? Because I think Matt had a really sensitive topic. And I remember in his interview, this is something we asked him about as far as like, this is something that is intimate to a lot of people and it's something that's important to establish trust. And he obviously had a good answer because he got selected and is really good at this. So Matt, I'm gonna call on you for this question.
Sure. Yeah, I think obviously I haven't traveled yet, so I can't really speak to concrete anecdotal experiences, but so my specific topic, like I mentioned earlier, is around the topic of marriage, specifically because my own parents are divorced. And so growing up, I really felt as if I was lacking something in my mental model of marriage and what long-term connection really looks like between two individuals. And so I think in terms of establishing that kind of trust and line of communication, there really has to be, I think it has to be a case-by-case basis. So one of the ways that I really wanted to engage in those conversations or learn from my own project was to simply stay with host families and to observe their day-to-day rituals and mundane life, because I really think it is in that day-to-day that a marriage is built and a relationship is formed. But I think to answer your question more directly, I don't think it hurts to come in like aware that you are coming from this Western foreign perspective with privilege, and to really come at it from a place of genuine curiosity, explaining your intention behind the project, and establishing that line of trust before breaching like a more sensitive topic. So something I remember speaking to Nigel Walker, I believe he was the 2017-2018 fellow, and he studied specifically fatherhood. Growing up without a father in his life himself, he really wanted to investigate like what fathers around the world are like. And so my topic is kind of similar in that sense. And so I called him before stepping into my interview, asking, like, how did you go about engaging in these conversations? And so something that I thought was really interesting that he told me, in the beginning, he had prepped this document of so many different questions, but quickly realized like that the most effective way to go about it was to actually go in with 3 very basic questions, like, what was your father like? Tell me something about him. And then depending on each person in a case-by-case basis, just like any relationship or conversation you might have, like feeling out the edges, and navigating through, okay, would it be appropriate to go a step further and ask about something more profound? That's what I would say.
So this is for the female fellows. I'm just curious to hear how you all developed a travel plan. I'm hearing all this spontaneity and all of that, that you also felt safe going to these countries and communities. Like, did you work with the Office of Global Safety? How did you come up with, I guess, a vague itinerary where it still leaves room for spontaneity, but still taking into account safety and precautions?
I can take some of that. And then Judd's also on the fellowship board, so he helps sort of advise, and Elizabeth does too. So they can also add just like logistical stuff. And Vanderbilt's gotten so many more resources, I know, since I left, that help with this kind of stuff. And I will also just say, like, all the fellows, every one of the fellows that has been on this is very honest, and you can probably just see that in the ones that you're talking to, like, very honest about their experiences. Very aware, and that's like a fundamental piece of who the fellowship board selects, is like just being self-aware. Like, I understand, what I come with and what I look like and what I'm doing in these places, and sort of the emotions that can arise in those. So I think that is just keeping that in mind is important. So a lot of us have been to these places recently and can help with just like, here's what I felt like, here's what I experienced anecdotally. A lot of us have jobs where we travel abroad or look at like other foreign places, and so are aware of that. But there's a few offices within Vanderbilt specifically that you'll sit down with before you go. I don't remember the name or if it's changed since I left a few years ago. But before Jerome and I left, we actually sat down with the office and went through our itinerary, knowing it was going to change. I tried to take into account places so the State Department had a level, like a safety level for each place. I tried to take that into account in each place. I tried to do just like pretty basic background research on each place, sort of like things that you would want to know as a female, like what are they wearing? What are the norms? What are the customs? Because I mean, as you know, you're asking the question, like some places, just be aware, like you may not have the same sort of rights or be treated the same way. And I always felt like I was the most prepared if I just had the most information. So actually like put a lot of stock in doing reading, asking fellows that had been, asking people that had been, and then specifically anywhere that I thought was going to be like a little more touchy or that I should be more cautious, I tried to have a host family. So rather than like staying in an Airbnb or staying like in a hostel, tried to actually like have a host family that I was staying with that I felt like would be able to advise on sort of what was or wasn't right. And I'll pause there if anyone else has anything to add from like what they did or what they've seen and how they've been successful.
So I'll just fill in, as Danielle mentioned, it's now called the Office of Global Safety. It was previously part of GEO. It now has its own freestanding space on the first floor of the Student Life Center. And this is a broader first comment, if anybody would like us to review a potential list of host countries or countries to be visited, please share that with me by the 21st so that I have time to touch base with Global Safety and with GEO. We're not going to tell you that you can't travel to somewhere, in part because we honestly don't know what the situation on the ground may look like in July of 2022, when we're expecting that you'll all be able to begin your travels. But we will raise any flags that we see or try to make you aware of concerns that you should be thinking about as you're planning. We fully expect flexibility. And I think one of the things we're looking for in applicants is for you to demonstrate an awareness that, for example, a natural disaster could take place. There could be government instability in a country that you intended to visit. There are so many things beyond COVID that could impact your travel. We want to see that you've done the legwork, that you have a sense of what your resources might be, and then we're happy to connect you with Vanderbilt connections, whether that's students, whether that's alumni, whether that's faculty, and some of the staff. We have staff that represent, I think, 180 countries. So, there are plenty of resources to take advantage of. And I would say that it's not only if you identify as female. There are a lot of different identities that Vanderbilt students hold that potentially could put them at risk at some locations in the world. So we'll do whatever we can to ensure that you're safe. You're traveling as a representative of Vanderbilt, and we want to make sure that you have the best possible fellowship experience. Anybody else want to chime in, or do we have other questions? We're happy to answer if we can.
I can add one thing. Oh, sorry, there was a question. Oh, I'll just quickly add to that question. Obviously, I haven't traveled yet, but I think one thing that was helpful for me when I was kind of coming up with my topic, planning for the application, then planning since then, is kind of thinking about the differences between like spontaneity and like what you actually need to know. So I think leaving room for spontaneity, but like in my case, a lot of places that I'm going are like in more remote areas and like out into nature where there isn't a lot of access to like cell service, other like direct points of contact. So in those cases, kind of like what Danielle said, knowing as much as possible in those scenarios, and then maybe like, no, you don't know exactly how you're going to get from city A to city B, but if you're going to be in situations that are like more out there where you don't have access to resources, like prepare for those as much as you can and leave room for spontaneity like in other places. So it's like that balance between like having room to take up opportunities, but knowing like when you actually need to know what's going on. That was convoluted, but I think reiterating what people were saying, but yes.
Yeah, this isn't, this is slightly related, but more of a tangent off of what Francis was just mentioning about how I thought really helped me prepare for my application. I think that when I attended my information session my senior year, something that really resonated with me that was said, I can't remember who it was, whether it was, I believe it might have been Dr. Kelly Moore, one of our past alums as well. But she was like, the Keegan Fellowship is unique in the sense that no concrete deliverable is really being asked of you by the end of the experience, right? There's no thesis project or formal research report that you have to write, but rather the deliverable is you at the end of the experience, everything you've learned, all the ways you've grown. And so through your application to really be able to demonstrate, okay, how is this specific experience going to change my life and my path to become a more informed global citizen, to become a more informed global leader. That was something that really helped serve as a North Star for me in putting together the application.
Any other questions?
I had a quick question about how people kind of went about getting in contact with like host families. Is that something that like the fellowship helps you out with, or just like how would that look?
Do the fellows want to answer that one?
I started with Vanderbilt alumni in those various cities that I was going to, along with Professor Wortley's contacts. He was the head of the Department of Developing Economies. Um, Outside of that, I think Danielle and I think you guys have some more relevant and more current as it relates. There used to be a team called Servos where you could go and stay with a host family, but you had to reciprocate in ways. I lived on a kibbutz for a while and then had made those kind of opportunities came up, but I'll leave it up to some of the other more recent fellows.
Yeah, this was a question. I think I over-prepared this question actually for my interview, because I think I got that question in my interview of like, how are you going to find these people? And I like pulled a notepad out of my pocket. It was like, I already have the answer to that. But I wanted to think through it in particular because I knew my topic was very touchy and very cautious. And I thought that was a very fair question to ask of like, how are you going to find these people? And what makes you think they're going to talk to you? So it was just something I wanted to make sure, like, when I put these countries on the itinerary, I wasn't just saying like, oh, I hope I find someone there. I wanted to have like a few touch points where I would actually be able to say like, I have already looked into this and I haven't reached out because I don't have the fellowship, but like, here is a like pretty clear plan of action for me to be able to follow. And one thing I tried to leverage a ton was professors at Vanderbilt. Almost all of them have their PhDs. So they've probably done a lot of studying with like foreigners, with people that went abroad or that still live abroad. So really have a lot of connections. So I tried to really utilize professors at Vandy, specifically like within the political science department, which was relevant to my topic, but also just happened to lend itself well to people having friends and family and coworkers that lived in other places. And I also, once I actually got it, used the Keegan network, like all the past fellows that have been on it in the last 10 years to, when our first fellow went, a lot of us keep in touch with the people we stayed with. And I know like every fellow has a story like this, but like have caught up with them since, have seen them since, seen them around the world. They've come to the US. It's really a relationship, at least with many of the people you stay with, that over time you realize how thankful you are. And a lot of times you'll end up going to stay with people that you found through a Keegan fellow that stayed with them 20 years ago, and they sort of now keep all the Keegan fellows there. And just that's sort of different places, some more obvious than others. Almost every Keegan fellow went to like London and knows someone there. But there's other places that just depending on your interests in your research project, we may know people through. So I think the Keegan network is a huge one. And obviously you aren't going to have concrete connections off of that, but I think you can say, pretty broadly, like, I hope I can leverage the Keegan network to find connections in these places. I try to do research into like when I had went abroad, when I was at Vanderbilt, if I knew anyone that had connections overseas, from like internships. And a lot of those actually started with like people's cousins or like family members overseas. And sometimes they would say like, we don't have space or we no longer live there, but we do know this person that lives there and I trust them. So, the long answer is sort of like any way I could find them. And it got easier the longer I was overseas, because you'll stay with someone in London and, they'll say like, sort of what Judd said way earlier. You'll be like, I was going to go to Ukraine next. And they're like, no, you're not. You need to come to the NATO conference in Brussels. And you're like, all right, I guess I'm going to the NATO conference in Brussels. And then you'll meet 10 people there that are like, where are you going after this? You should come stay with me. So it definitely gets easier the more you go along and the more you meet people. But just to start, I think like professors, Keegan fellow networks, like really any niche within Vanderbilt that you can find. I was like, I'm from Kentucky, like no family members live abroad. I was like personally shocked at how many connections and networks just really opened up once I got it. I was certainly not someone that had like 1,000 connections abroad already.
Thanks, Danielle. Any other questions, including if you have any technical questions about the application?
This is a general application question, if that applies.
Sure.
But just would love to know kind of the most difficult or most unexpected part of the application that you all faced, kind of how you navigated challenges as you were developing this project. What resources did you rely on? How did you kind of make sure your application was as strong as it could be even before submitting it?
I will.
Barton, you haven't said anything all meeting. Please go.
That's very intentional. No, I would toss out the one thing I would say that I think I'm the only one on this who does share with you all is that I know I applied knowing that COVID existed as like a thing. I think it is easy to feel like that because there is the line on the application that like you should consider the current safety level and all of the different like countries on the CDC's website and the State Department's website. As you're considering that, I will encourage you again to like as you're building your country list, I would say like I made a point on my application, like here's the stuff that you said I can list. If COVID didn't exist, here's all the other places I would list, like definitely keeping in mind like what your pandemic free Keegan list would look like and making like the committee aware that you know what that looks like. Not that COVID is just going to suddenly disapparate in the next 6 months, although that would be nifty. But you know, there are more vaccines rolling out every 3 months. So along the way, definitely keep your ears open and don't feel like your topic is going to get shafted because a couple of the specific countries that would make your topic work so well are not on that level 1 and level 2. That's my contribution.
I think that in terms of some of those resources, and I would love to hear from Francis Barton, the other fellows as well, but I would really read through a lot of the past fellows and their projects to get a good sense of what kind of topics they were interested, how they went about it, what kind of topics have already been done in the past. Yeah. And there are a lot of photos attached as well, so you'll get a really good sense for what the fellowship can be and looks like. I would also definitely utilize the Career Center. I remember in working through my application, I think I met with the graduate fellowships assistant at the time a couple of different times, just going through my my application and talking through some questions I had. Reach out to past fellows. I know that Barton, Francis, and I specifically have been getting quite a few people reaching out to us just because we've been so close to the most recent application cycle. And in terms of finally submitting your application, I thought something that was really helpful for me was having a couple of really trusted close friends read through it to see if, does this represent me? Does this sound like my voice and something that I would write? Because at the end of the day, what the fellowships committee is really looking for is an investment in the fellow rather than the specific project at hand.
So I'll just build on what Matt mentioned. We are resuming, they will be virtual next week, starting on Tuesday, drop-in hours in the Career Center. This week, if you'd like to speak with somebody, you can use Doorways and schedule an appointment with your coach or coaches. We're going to do some Keegan specific drop-ins that will be posted on Doorways the end of next week and the beginning of the week that the application is due. If you have any technical issues with InfoReady, please feel free to email me directly. It generally is pretty bug-free, but every so often there's an attachment that's an issue. And the other thing I'll encourage you to think about in addition to your proposal, we encourage you to submit a CV rather than a resume. And the reason for that is we want to learn more about you beyond your professional experiences or something that's a one-page academic and professional summary. Let us know what your interests are. Show us how you've demonstrated leadership at Vanderbilt. Show us the ways that you've engaged in your community, whether that's at Vanderbilt or Nashville, or whether that's at home. We all recognize COVID has played an outsized impact in our applicants for the last 2 years. Matt and Francis were the last of the before times. But we'd still like to see, did you pick up a new hobby? Did you learn a new language? Did you work full time? What did you do to cope with the challenges since Vanderbilt shut down in March of 2020? And, we want to get to know you as individuals. So please feel free to be a little bit irreverent and to share something beyond what normally belongs on an academic or career focused application. And unless we have any more questions, I think I'll ask if Judd, Danielle, Barton, Matt, and Francis have any last advice that they would like to give. And other than that, we wish you all of the best. We're really looking forward to seeing your applications. And I'm looking forward to seeing most of you back on campus next week.
I have one quick question, if that's okay. I was wondering, I guess specifically towards Judd and Danielle, like when you were traveling, kind of how you dealt with any language barriers that came up. So like if there was someone kind of specific that you wanted to talk to, but not knowing a common language was a big issue, like how did you circumvent that? And then I guess for the fellows that haven't traveled yet, like how are you planning to circumvent that? If you've like given that any thought, we'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
For myself, I had some Latin background and some Spanish, but outside of that, most, English is certainly still widely spoken, especially in my area where it was focused on business, the business community. So language really wasn't a problem. And then you pick up enough, I picked up enough Arabic and enough Hebrew. And so that it allowed me to operate. I was in China early on, and that was a challenge. And so I did end up spending a great deal of time seeking out those folks that were English speakers, but this was, very early in China. So, but yeah, I didn't find it a problem, honestly. And then you just, now Google Translate among other things, and it, you figure it out. You figure it out. Good luck to all of you. Thanks so much for your interest. I've got to run, Elizabeth. Thanks much.
Sort of what Jed said, I think I actually asked this in my interview, like when they asked if we had questions, and was shocked when almost all of them unanimously said like wasn't as big of an obstacle as I thought it would be. I agree with that. I'd say the same thing now. It's still an obstacle. One thing I tried to do before I went anywhere was just Google like very basic words, like literally like yes, no, please, thank you. And I think that's just a good way, like if I was taking a cab somewhere or trying to order food or anything like that, I think it means a lot to at least show you're making an effort in each place. And so that's sort of an aside from like the language barrier question, but I would do that. I just think it's a good thing to do. You pick up a lot of random words in different languages as you go, but I think just like general courtesy, that always went a long way. And I would try to stumble through the other language, and a lot of times they would laugh at me and realize I certainly did not speak it, but at least it was like an attempt. And then secondly, in places where there were people that I really wanted to talk to that didn't speak English, or at least didn't speak enough English, and Matt probably has a good thought on this too, because similar to him, like I wanted to have conversations where I was sort of trying to get to what people felt. And a lot of times, even if people speak basic English, they couldn't get that far. They couldn't like really find the right words. A lot of times I would try to find like people our age. So a few times I had host families where the kids spoke English or spoke like fairly fluent English. The parents didn't speak any English at all. So a few times I had like the kids like, hey, do you mind? I'll like get you lunch tomorrow. If you'll sit down and translate this interview, or like sort of do, sometimes their parents could do like a little bit of English and then need help on some words that were more nuanced. And I actually think it was like a pretty interesting experience for everyone, because a lot of times those weren't questions you would ever ask your parents. So I like to think it was like an interesting experience for the kid and me and the adult. But that was one way I tried to circumvent some of those. And then I do know a few past fellows that in one place or another just tried to like Google like a translator or someone that spoke English, which wasn't too hard to do. I never had to actually do that, but I did use like people I'd met in the country, or specifically with the host family, if one of the kids or the people like peers my age spoke English, using that for like parents or grandparents worked.
So I want to let David Albright say hi. David is another Keegan Fellow, and I'd like to give him just a minute to tell us what his Keegan Fellowship experience was like, where he traveled, and if he has any advice to share with you, since he also sits on the interviews.
Thank you. I'm sorry there was a snafu and I missed getting the Zoom link, so I'm just now joining you folks. Sorry about that, but I was the very first traveling fellow at Vanderbilt in 1963. So that's probably before most of your parents were born. This was 59 years ago. So anyway, it was a wonderful experience. I was a pace setter on this program and first one out at Vanderbilt. But it meant so much to my career and my personal outlook of life. And one thing that when you have this opportunity to travel around the world, the main thing to me is how you'll learn other cultures, other ways of living, and adapt yourself accordingly and be a good citizen of the world. And one thing it will do is give you a wanderlust. Here in my age, I'm now I'll be 81 in April, but I want to show you where I went 2 years ago. Can you see that? Antarctica. I went at age 78 3 years ago, wrapped up my last continent. So during my travels, I went to, I think, 42 countries and all the continents, but South America and Antarctica. So since then, I've made that up. I've been to South America many times since then. I got into an international business career as a result of my fellowship. And I just had to get to Antarctica before it was all over. I've been to, I guess Australia is the continent I've been to the least times, and that was 9 during my career. And so anyway, you guys, just looking ahead in life, one opportunity of this fellowship is not just to expand your knowledge of a particular field, but to increase your wonder about the world and your knowledge of the world and your lust for living and knowing peoples of other cultures. So anyway, I don't want to ramble on too long, but one thing I would encourage you to do, I'm not sure with the COVID limitations, how it restrict your ability to adjust your travels. But one thing we've always promoted to the applicants and the recipients of the fellowship is to be flexible as you travel. And if you have an opportunity as you're traveling, you see some place that you want to visit, even though it may have nothing to do with your project, take the opportunity. I'll give you 2 examples. When I was in Thailand, my project was studying American plant operations abroad by U.S. manufacturing companies with an eye to a career in international business. When I was in Thailand, I took the opportunity to go over to Cambodia and visit Angkor Wat. Now that had nothing to do with my program, but to go to Angkor Wat and see the way things were back there in the 8th, 9th centuries and the wonderful ruins there and the jungle ruins. It was a fabulous experience. Another was when I was in India, I went up to Kathmandu to Nepal. Again, that had little to do with, if anything, with my project, but to go up there a week and see what life was and experience being in Nepal and flying by and seeing the Himalayas out in the distance. These are opportunities that you must take advantage of when you're traveling. Grasp the moment, seize the day, or so forth. So anyway, I wish you luck in your applications and encourage you to apply for this fellowship. One thing I would say too to you applicants, try to put in your application what you really want your project to lead you in life. How do you think it's going to help you reach your goals, be it academically or occupation wise? But don't just put in a project to learn something. Put in there how you think it's going to affect you in the future and make you a better leader in your field as you get on in life. So that's my 2 bits.
Thank you so much, David. Barton, Francis, Matt, any last comments or words of wisdom you'd like to pass along?
This is super brief, but oh, sorry, David.
I couldn't understand whether she's speaking to me or you guys.
Oh, I think she was asking if we had any closing words to impart. And I was just gonna kind of add on to what David said and also circle back, Maddie, to your question a little bit. When I was thinking about my application, I kind of thought of this Venn diagram of like why my project on one side and why me on the other side, and tried to have my application be like that center of those overlapping circles. So make your case for you, make your case for your project, and like why those things need to go together.
Yeah, I think David summarized it pretty well, that choosing to apply for this, like you're already choosing a pretty exciting shindig. You're choosing to, I think, see the world in a way that you might not have gotten to beforehand. Probably all of you are feeling already the impact of Vanderbilt on like your perspective as just a person and the way that you view everything going on. Hopefully, like you have a more nuanced view of COVID than you would have otherwise. Doing this is going to get it a bajillion times more of that. And so I think the last piece of advice that I would toss out, aside from, I guess I'll go back to the language question to say that, like, thinking too about the untranslatables that you are bringing to the table. I've told several of the people that have asked about the application that I was chosen in spite of the fact that I am monolingual. But I make balloon animals, and I've been to other countries and done balloon animals for people who do not speak my language, and it has worked surprisingly well. So thinking about, maybe not just like point and stare and those options, but thinking about the ways that you can get your point across and help help yourself understand what is happening. I think that is one way to think about it.
I think my last piece of advice would be just good luck, and that no matter what happens at the end, you're going to learn a lot about yourself through putting together the application. I think because it really forces you to take a good look at where you've been, where you are now in terms of graduating college, and then where you'd like to go. So it should be fun. It should be fun.
So I want to thank all of the fellows for giving their time and answering questions tonight. And I want to wish you all the best luck. If you have questions, you can send an email to fellowships@vanderbilt.edu, or you'll find my email address, Elizabeth Lambert, on the Career Center website. And all of the best, good luck, and we can't wait to read your applications.